welcome everyone. Welcome to this fifth session of Beyond Bohm, Imagination, Creativity and Dialogue. I'm James Pete Barbieri, Associate Program Director here at the Power Center, and I will be your host for today. As a host, I'm here to help you throughout the call, so any issues, let me know in the chat. Before I begin, just let me very briefly go through the guidelines for the Zoom call. First, if you can please mute your microphone to ensure good quality audio, but at the same time, we do invite you all to turn on your camera. It's always nice to see everyone's faces. The chat, as usual, will be closed during the discussion, but will be opened up during Q&A. So during this time, feel free to share your ideas, thoughts, or any additional material once the chat's open. Finally, this session is recorded for archival purposes and for you all. You should receive the links to the recordings in a few days. So today we will be talking about dialogue in the age of Zoom, and we will be joined by Julie Arts, Richard Burg, Anna Factor, Sally Jeffery, Beth Macy, Lee Nichol, and Dave Schrum. With that, I will pass it straight over to you, Lee. Welcome.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Eleanor, and thank you, everyone at PARI. Just one or two housekeeping things before we begin. We will take a break, but that break, body break, or whatever you would like to call it, that break won't come until we're well and deep into our session, even as much as an hour and a half after we begin. That will be a very short break of about 3 minutes. So anyone that needs to take a break in our roundtable or any of the people that are participating more broadly, please don't hesitate to just check out and take your break whenever you need to. And I would like to just also reiterate what James said about staying muted unless you're speaking. We've occasionally had some issues where people would be unmuted and we're unaware of it, and a considerable amount of background noise ended up coming into the session. So if you could keep your eye on that, that would be great. So as James said, our topic today is dialogue in the age of Zoom. So I think we all know what Zoom is. Here we are. But dialogue is something that means probably different things to different people. You can have a dialogue with two people in the flesh, sitting in someone's living room, talking. And you can have a dialogue with 200 people in a Zoom session or some other digital format. And everything in between and beyond those possibilities. So we're not going to try to cover every possibility of dialogue. Our group today, our roundtable, there are a number of us that have considerable experience with what's called often Bohmian dialogue. And then there are some of us that have experience outside of that in different kinds of dialogue. And it's that format, similar to that format, that's the kind of experience that we'll be bringing to bear today in our dialogue. And there are actually a number of features that link us in that way in the kind of dialogues that we've done in the past. And one of those features, it really is very simple. It has to do with a deep quality of listening. That's one aspect of dialogue that I think we share. And another is that in many kinds of dialogue, people look to learn to understand more deeply, how does our consciousness work? How are we put together? What can we come to understand about that through dialogue? And then one more, we could list many, but one more really has to do with uncovering new meanings that could actually change our lives, that could change the way that we live. So those are some of the qualities that all of us in our roundtable today have worked with and experienced in various forms of dialogue that we worked with. So having said that, we'll begin today with a question, and each one of our group will respond to that question. And once we've all done that, then we'll have amongst the seven of us a more free-flowing discussion. So the question is this: is there some feature or aspect of dialogue that is particularly significant or meaningful for you? And along with that, how does that feature compare in your experience with in the flesh dialogue, person to person, real life dialogue, as compared to a digital platform dialogue like Zoom? So I'll go through that once more. Is there some feature or aspect of dialogue that is particularly significant or meaningful for you? And how does that feature or aspect shape up in living face-to-face in the flesh dialogue as compared to online dialogue? So Richard, I'll ask you to get us going.
That's a really great question, because thinking about dialogue in contrast to other forms of communication is particularly meaningful to me, because my work beginning around 1990 for almost 15 years was working with groups in organizations or outside organizations. And introduced to dialogue, I discovered a way to gather with people focused more on the silence than the utterings, at least from my own perspective. And the things you mentioned, the uncovering new meaning, or as I would think about it, looking for the assumptions that were driving our utterance that we weren't necessarily conscious of, was something that was important in my consulting work, although it was never focused or discussed about. My work was built upon a psychodynamic view of the group, where in addition to the task of the work group, there was always an unconscious work group, as described by Wilfred Bion, a dependency group or a pairing group or a leader role. Anyway, coming into dialogue, I just found a way to enrich my own understanding of what might be going on when people gather from a completely different perspective. So having said that, for me, going to Zoom dialogue was an enormous opening up, because of our ability to be in California, the UK, Belgium, Canada, all at the same time as we are right here. But what was missing was what I think is the field of human beings being in the same space, a field that doesn't necessarily have a tactile or an element that you can actually put your finger on. But there is a way when we're in a room with others that we're touched by people's state of being in a way that we can't necessarily actually describe. So I've loved the opportunity to get online and do dialogue, for the very reason that there are 83 people listening to me right now. But I really miss the quality that emerges when there are 20 or 30 people in the same space, and the silences have a quality that is very different than the silence in this environment.
Oh, well, I'll try and pick up from there, Richard. Well, I think of dialogue as a sacred space, potentially or actually. But I think the quality that stands out for me is that it's disturbing. I often say it's properly disturbing. And if I say that, I think of, say, the images that are coming back from the James Webb telescope at the moment. Everybody talks about their astounding beauty, but I have to say I find them properly disturbing. I guess because of the unfathomableness of what we're being shown. So, I mean, I'd like to have said something about one or two things that are in mind from the previous sessions, but I think I'll perhaps try and leave that till when we all talk together, because there are several things from those sessions. But I think that when I talk about disturbance in dialogue, there's the kind of surface level of the way in which we might provoke each other's defenses or reveal our own assumptions. But I think more deeply, in the way I think Rob in the first session brought out the issue of awareness in real time, I think he called it. And he was talking about our repetitive mode of being mostly, and that somehow these things are easy to talk about, but not easy to enter into and talk within the movement of them. So I think when we start to be aware that, as one of Sky's slides showed, the quote from Bohm about often when we think we're thinking, we're rearranging our prejudices. I think when we start to become aware of that, and aware, as Hester pointed out, of the potentiality in participation. I think she used the word disturbing for that, when we really confront the actuality of participation. So I'm talking about a disturbance below the simply psychological, which is difficult enough for most of us to field most of the time. So if I think of that disturbance and the fact that perhaps a lot of the time, in terms of thought, memory, image, we're living in a virtual reality much of the time anyway. I've been a massage therapist for more than 30 years, so bodies are my thing, and I do miss the physical, being in the physical presence of people I'm in dialogue with. But I think the potential for disturbance, in my experience with the different groups I've been involved with over the last 2 or 3 years, is, to my surprise really, is there as much online as it is in each other's presence.
Well, I very much resonate with both what Richard was talking about and Sally. And Sally, you talked about dialogue as a sacred space. And interestingly, you juxtaposed that with it being a disturbing space, not only superficially disturbing, but disturbing at a deep pre-verbal level. And I think that for me, what's most important in dialogue is the moments and times that it comes into contact with pre-verbal mind in its various dimensions, be those disturbing, be they, the dark places of the individual or the collective psyche. I mean, dialogue's a great place to open up an exploration of the collective psyche. And there are also, pre-verbal apprehensions that you know, can expand into creative action. And then there's, you know, there's that beyond all the machinery of personal mind and collective mind. So I think that with dialogue, Bohm, his intention was to open up to us this incredible space of exploration. And what would I say after that? I mean, he saw it as an opportunity to transform human consciousness and human culture together, the individual and the collective in one movement. And that all of that really touches something in me that perhaps actually goes back to my first year in school as a little child, when I found that we were doing all this mechanical learning, and I wondered when the real stuff was going to come. And then eventually, you know, that creative and fluid and moving, the impetus to that and the importance of that kind of went away, you know, just gets eroded. So dialogue, takes me back in that sense to opportunities that were missed, and to build and develop from a different mind, from an adult mind. And in terms of dialogue in an age of Zoom, I like dialogue in an age of Zoom. You know, don't have to travel for miles and pay thousands of dollars and get to see all kinds of wonderful people. I really like it. And in terms of seeing images on the screen, I think in line with what Sally was saying, I think we all live in a virtual reality, seeing images on a screen anyhow, but we don't really realize it. I mean, both visually and psychologically. So that's how I would like to open in concert with Richard and Sally. Thank you.
You're muted, Anna.
Okay. I was saying I resonate very much with both what Sally and Richard have said. David, when we began dialogues with David Bohm, the different people from different organizations, as it were, many of whom had their own sort of language. And what I found interesting about dialogue was that people could come together and learn what their own true voices were, without the overlay of some acceptable cultish language or way of thought. They could talk for themselves. I found it interesting because I find it quite scary talking to groups of people. One-on-one, two is fine. So I really welcomed that opportunity with smaller groups and with bigger groups as we became, to give people an opportunity, and for myself to hear what other people's experience and thinking was. And in the early days, of course, we were guided by David with us and his interest in consciousness, which is what I think brought us all together in the first place. And it was quite mind-opening in lots of ways. And I think that's sort of stayed with me, that the sense of connection that developed between people and community. And I think that's what I've really appreciated in this time of Zoom, because I've had quite an isolated experience. I'm old and most of my friends are older and have popped off. So it's been really good to connect with like-minded people. And I've had, as well as Beth's dialogue, I've been involved with some other ones here in people mostly here in California. And I think it's that sense of connection that has become very important to me, and the community. I think very much that that's what we need in these times, difficult times actually. So I'm really pleased to have Zoom. I miss the sort of bodily presence of other people, and I'm rather interested in how it seems to affect our emotions, our feelings. If our bodies aren't present, we seem to be more, quite perhaps it's obvious, but more cerebral, but a bit less emotional, more accepting of each other. And we don't seem to get into the quite fierce oppositions that we do in group dialogues that I remember. It's been so long, honestly. Yes, so this is what I like about Zoom. How else would I see you all and be able to hear what you're thinking? And it gives me a sense of the greater world outside the man-made boundaries of my house and garden and the street outside. And of course, then I'm reminded that the mere fact that we're on Zoom is technology made by man, but in this case, it's one I'm grateful for.
I recognize that, Anna, the connection that the potential that it brings. I used to work with dialogue, I think more than 15 years now, and since 2015 online. And in the beginning, there was a lot of resistance just because there is so much not there. But the magic of being in the same space with people from all around the world is just, it stays magical for me with a face and with expression. And I can so enjoy having, like being in Belgium and having dinner with a friend in California. I was having breakfast. And you learn to appreciate that it is as if you are together. And, you know, there is, having worked with dialogue in a lot of different contexts and cultures, I noticed that there is this part that is universally human, to be in relationship and to be in connection. But there are a million ways to feel invited to participate in a dialogue. And especially if you work internationally or cross-cultural, developing that sensitivity of how do you create the conditions that every single person really feels invited to participate in however their way of participation is. And to just create those conditions to be in circle and that everyone is present, not only the ones talking or not only the ones who feel most comfortable. And that creating a container, they call it sometimes, or creating a holding space, for me feels the most important part of my work when I'm hosting dialogues or conversations or circles. And somehow what I've learned is that the online space amplifies what is present. So if there is a lack of trust, it's very hard to redirect that. If there is a lot of trust, the capacity to have a really intimate, truthful, and authentic conversation is actually higher almost in an online space. If people are distracted, you lost them. If they're really present, they're really present. So online space amplifies whatever is lingering. And you can create the conditions for those things beforehand, like you do in an in-person space. And then sometimes you just have to let it go. There's more possibilities to intervene or change the conditions in an in-person space than in an online space. But there's something that is just amplified, and in both sentences, in the most intimate and authentic sense, as sometimes in the most distracted sense. So yeah, that's but I still love it. I am still seeing it as a gift, although sometimes I'm really Zoom tired, like so many people. But I guess balance is the invitation.
So much to ponder in everything that you all said. And I've been pondering kind of backwards for the couple weeks that we've been working together online here, thinking about just recognizing how my sense of dialogue has shifted over the 2 weeks. And by that, what I mean is I was thinking particularly of something that Stephen Bro presented. I think it was seems to me it was the second weekend, or yeah. And what Steve showed was the progression that I would call the progression of meaning from something that gets picked up by the artist that's very unarticulated yet. It's something that's unknown yet. And through the artist process of preparation of the canvas, through all of the drawings that might be done, the mixing of the colors, etc., all those things, those are ways in which the artist begins to take that initial insight they've received and then translate it into something that they can eventually make into an art object and then can be shared. And I've been thinking from that really dialogue is a form of imagination. And that just really kind of took me by surprise. So dialogue, I think, is imagination writ large, because it's actually not just one person, it's doing imagination together. So this is just my kind of, I knew, aha, I'm still playing with this. I don't know if it's exactly so. When you think about what Bohm said, he called dialogue to be a flow of meaning. And so I'm thinking that the times that are the most precious in dialogue to me, the ones that I just really love, is when the group seems to gel. And it's as if we, like an artist, begin to perceive some kind of insight we can't even yet articulate. It's something fuzzy. It's something that seems to want to become present with us. It seems to want to explicate through us. And the group as a whole is able not to interact with each other in doing it, because when we interact, we're all coming from our own stuff. We're coming from our own mindset. But it seems to me when we're really into that flow of dialogue, we're all coming from within that insight. We're all in the same spot of origination. And even though what we say at first and what we're sharing is this, something begins to form, doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a while. It's the playing with it together as if we're working with one mind that finally comes into something that we can make sense of. So to me, I think I really have to thank Steve for his sharing of that, because it just really blew up my picture of dialogue and thinking, you know, it really is a form of imagination that we as a group participate in. So we participate from the inside of the insight, not from the outside of it. So that was my aha that I've been coming to and thinking of it a bit differently. Dialogue also takes place in different forms. I think there's a lot of really healthy dialogue. Like Richard, and probably like Julie, I use dialogue a lot in my professional career. Not necessarily to fix organizational problems so they made more money, but definitely as a process to help bring the innate humanness of these people trying to work together in a way that made it more livable and made it a more productive living place for everyone there. So there's different forms of it, but I think that they all kind of have to do with bringing a level of something that's very subtle that we can't yet grasp, and together working it until we get it into something that's dense enough, that's material enough that we can actually put it into some form we can do something with. So that's kind of how I picture the most precious time, is when we can use it as imagination. Now, in terms of online versus in present, I don't know I have anything other than what people said, except the fact that I tried for years, where I live in Houston, Texas, in the US. I tried for a long time to gather people together to have in-person dialogues. And it was tougher than nails to find people who were interested. So I never could make it flourish as a local event. And I think one of the beauties of the internet is allowing us to find people who are of a similar mind, so that we can do something so unusual as dialogue. And so it allows us to find a community, whereas it can be really tough to find community when there isn't a broad enough scale of people from which to pull. So like the others, I've really enjoyed this. I think some of the most profound times I've had in terms of dialogue have actually been online. And many of you who are here today have been part of some of those. So I think I really appreciate what Julie said. I think there's a capacity that accentuates with the online capacity, and I'm all for that. So that's enough for me. I'll quit there.
I've been making some brief notes such that I can while trying to listen. And there's just so much that's been brought out in what everyone has shared. It's almost hard to talk into it because it's so rich. But before I offer my bit, I want to come clean, meaning that before COVID and before the film Infinite Potential, these didn't exactly coincide, but they somewhat coincided. And prior to either of those, I had a number of friends and acquaintances who worked with online dialogue. And I wouldn't do it. I had a very strong mindset, not negative toward it per se, but I just didn't want to do it. I felt like it really couldn't do the kinds of things that the type of dialogue that I had worked with, which is and was Bohmian dialogue, I just had come to the conclusion that it really couldn't be done, that maybe some good things could be done, but that some of the essential qualities wouldn't be possible over the internet. So I never participated at all. And then there was this film by Paul Howard, Infinite Potential, about David Bohm's life and work. And then a series of conversations and presentations that Pari sponsored that followed that film. And in participating in that, you know, I was forced into this online thing. And I wanted to be respectful and do what I could to speak to what I felt I had learned from David Bohm, but I really didn't want to go online. It didn't feel good to me. But I did it. And since starting that, you know, I've learned a great deal. I've learned, first of all, how much can be done in this format of Zoom and whatever other platforms people might use. And one example of that is we have an ongoing group that works with this question of what is Bohm's holoflux and how can we engage with what he meant by that. And that group's been going for a couple of years now. And we definitely were not a Bohmian dialogue group. You know, the things that we set out to do in the holoflux group, and the things that would be set out to do in any variant of Bohmian dialogue, they weren't the same. All the starting points were very different. A little bit of overlap, but not much. But somewhat recently, heading on to that 2-year mark, without any intention whatsoever on our part, that holoflux conversation group has just in some spontaneous way begun to take on some of those very intangible qualities of a Bohmian dialogue. And it's really, to me, been startling and incredibly welcome and beautiful to see that happen. And so again and again, I keep getting corrected and having to readjust my own preconceptions about working online and finding more and different ways in which it can really be viable. But having said that, there is this one aspect for me of the in the flesh dialogue that I still pine for in any of these online formats. And it's been mentioned by people already this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are, evening. And that is the full physicality that is a critical part in my understanding of Bohm's style of dialogue. So we can see right now, the most I see of anyone right now on the screen is a part of the torso and up, right? The rest of the body is not there. And in my experience, going back to maybe, I don't know, 1985 or 6, with a Bohm style dialogue, there's so much in first one's own body, but then even more so in the bodies of all the other people in the group, and then in the body of the group as a group. And the movement of energy through those various bodies, my body, Richard's body, Anna's body, then the body of this whole group, all of it. The movement of energy, the patterns of energy that are generated in that context. The developing a sensitivity to that and a feeling for that and attending to that, to me, has always been one of the most extraordinary things that David brought out in terms of dialogue. And it's very, very, very difficult, in my experience, for that particular piece of it to occur in this context. But what's interesting is some kind of variant of it occurs, right? It's not the same, but it's not as though the movement of energy is completely negated or neutralized. There is a kind of sensing of those movements through those bodies. But it's weird. I don't know how to describe it. I wouldn't say it's better or worse than the full body thing in the flesh, but it really is quite different. And so I'm only now beginning to pick up on that and get a feeling about it. But that for me would be the one thing that I would point to as a pretty radical difference between in the flesh dialogue and in the online dialogue. So having shared that, what I'd like to do now is open up our conversation. We can dispense with facilitation at this point and maybe dig a little deeper into everything that everyone has shared and see what else new might come out of that. So here we go. don't be shy.
I'm totally thrilled to be here because I've been alone with David
Excuse
Bohm
me.
for
Excuse me. My apology for miscommunicating. For the time being, our open discussion will be within this group of 7. And toward the end of the full session, we'll have a 20 to 30 minute segment for the larger audience engagement. But for now, if we could keep this between our group and just continue opening up what we've all shared so far this morning about our various experiences with dialogue.
I have a question I'd like to ask of Sally and Julie. I'm intrigued with what Julie said about the accentuation of kind of the underlying, what you call the lingering aspects. I really like that. And I really picked that up too myself. So I wonder if there's any relationship between that you're feeling the accentuation of. Is there any relationship to the lingering business and what Sally was calling the actual sacred qualities that she perceives at times in dialogue, or that she understands? Seems to me that they're both aspects of something that's much more subtle, much more perhaps implicate, but I wonder if they're the same, very different, or your thoughts, what the two of you might find as thoughts there.
I'll have a go at saying something, Beth. Yeah, well, there's always that when 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name kind of aspect of dialogue, isn't there? That, and I suppose there's the intention we bring to it, but it's come up a couple of times while we've each been talking that remembering, because you were talking about finding a like-minded people or something, I can't remember your phrase, and I remember in an early meeting with David Bohm and others at Sussex University back in the 80s, he was saying to a small group of us, oh, you know, we need to find a really good mix of people to talk together like this. And at some point before that, I'd had a little bit of voluntary work with a bunch of Hell's Angels. And so I said cheerily to him, so what if we could find a couple of Hell's Angels to join us? And he said, yeah, that would be great. But I didn't succeed in that. But I suppose if I think about, I mean, it would have been amazing. And I did have amazing conversations with those Hell's Angels. So I suppose what I was referring to about the sacred is, you know, Hester was talking about the unknowable, and she had some kind of amazing phrase about we're all buds reaching into the unknowable or something. I mean, I think we're all that, you know, we have to say either we all are or no one is. So, you know, Putin is and Trump is and Hell's Angels are and we all are. So I'm always nervous of kind of thinking about a homogenous group, you know, for that. So I think that sacred really is everywhere in all of us, but there's something about coming together and the attempt anyway, however much we fail, the attempt anyway to be vulnerable and open to each other, that I think begins for that bud that Hester talked about to move and grow into unknowable, maybe something like that. It's a bit clumsy, but I was interested too in what Julie was saying about the online. I think that was what you were asking about, Beth, the online situation intensifying both the difficult stuff and the positive stuff. I don't know.
And thank you, Beth and Sally. When you asked the question, my first reaction was almost searching for where they're connecting. Because I mean, dialogue is sacred. I loved that, how you said that, Sally. And I think it's in a way, it's sacred just because it's possible. And it's a human capacity to be connected. Where it is connected is for me that even in dialogue, you can move way beyond words. The words are just a vessel. It's not about the words. The words become a vessel for something else to come through. And often it comes through the cracks and the silence, and then all of a sudden it can show up. You just need to get yourself out of the way, basically, or create the space for it. And I think, like, when a couple of years we were in conversation with some of the Aboriginals in Western Australia, where they were talking about how silence is more important part of dialogue than the words itself. But then it becomes possible for the silence to express itself through the words. And that's how the mystery can find a way in. And they also said something around, in dialogue, it's a circular movement of energy, like you spoke, Lee. And so and that's how in an online space, I think it can move around. And I've been thinking a lot about what they were speaking back then. I think I might only understand a little bit of what it actually means. And every time I'm part of a dialogue where I feel it shows up, my body recognizes it, and maybe I understand a little bit more of how it is. But they say a good dialogue is way more influenced by what we can't perceive than what we can perceive.
I just noticed you used the word understand, Julie, and Dave, you'll correct me, but I think the under bit of understand comes from the Greek word for the guts. So it's I like it because it's a very earthy way of getting the meaning of understanding, is when something really touches you right in your belly. So I don't know if that's where it touches you, given that we're talking about the difference between embodied dialogue and online dialogue. But I mean, that's the strange thing about seeing you all on screen. I'm here in a body and I'm also there on the screen. So it's a very peculiar business, really. But I think I'm right about that the under bit is that right, David? Yeah, is related to the Greek word for the belly, the guts.
Well, that takes us back to something you had said earlier, Sally, a phrase that's still ringing through my head: properly disturbed. I think that's what. Yes, properly disturbing. Wow, what a statement. And to me, it goes to the heart of so much of what is valuable about many of the types of dialogue that we're all involved in. And I think to many people, if they hear that, it may be a little startling. Why would you engage in a process that's likely to be disturbing? But, and even more than that, properly disturbing. So I just want to flag that as something very important. And maybe one little piece of that is just to say that I think that we need that disturbance, that all of us are very strongly put together with our frameworks and our predispositions and the things that we've learned and the things that we've come to value. And by and large, we hold to all that pretty tightly. And it's not just coming from my own personal history, but that holding tightly in those values and assumptions, they're also coming from the societies that we live in. Bohm often referred to them as collective representations, many of which we don't even know that we have. And so for me, this being properly disturbed is part and parcel of shaking those things up, at least enough to allow a little ventilation, a little space, so that we can get a direct sense, not just an idea, but a direct sense that our preconceptions and assumptions may have limits and may actually be involved in destructive patterns. So that proper disturbance, I just think it's a very high value when we're talking about this dialogue process, and wanted to thank you for bringing that up.
I came to dialogue not to
be disturbed in the world today seems like a rational response to what flows across our screens. And the addition of the word proper points to how we can harness being disturbed in a richer way than just being upset about everything that flows across our information threshold. And it's actually, it points to what I often would walk away from a dialogue session, whether it was a whole day or just a couple of hours, that my upset about something I read in the paper gets tempered in some way by by being with others in a collective way, looking beyond the very superficial quality of the headline in the New York Times. And so it's not just challenging our assumptions and biases and cultural frameworks, but it's a way of joining with others in finding, and I think David mentioned action, but it's not action necessarily in the outside world, but action to temper that irritation that the news provides with a deeper way of looking at a response, even if it's only internal. Yeah, that was proper disturbance is great. And you're muted.
That's strange. Now, can you hear me now? Yes. Now, I was thinking that without some disturbance, we would stay in whatever state of consciousness we were, if we were comfortable. But the disturbance can push us into looking at how much our consciousness is sort of prefabricated by them and the acceptance of what society says we should be and what we are, our history, all of it. And I think what David was trying to do was shake us out of whatever consciousness, present consciousness we had, which accepted all of that, and look for a new consciousness. He foresaw some of the dangers ahead of us, which are now upon us, and people just not taking them seriously because they were comfortable in going around about their business and profiting from it too, and making sure nobody asked uncomfortable questions, perhaps. I find this aspect of dialogue to be the most interesting, how it can wake me up to what I ought to be paying attention to, a change in consciousness. I think it takes some energy, and I think the thing that comes to me from some of these previous weekend events has been energy. And even when Lee showed pictures of Van Gogh and others, what came through to me was the energy in them. An artistic representation of energy, which is what we are, what our universe is, and what our earth is. And are we in line with the energy of the earth and the cosmos? Or are we, well, it's a question I have of myself. And perhaps one of the things about Zoom conversations like this is they are sort of in the ether. And I think more and more about what it's going to be like to be disembodied. I mean, will I know? Will you know? But somehow there's something in the ether that connects us anyhow. We're present, and we're present with our ancestors and all that have been before us. Yeah. There's a lot more to consciousness than I've ever thought.
I also like the conversation about proper disturbance. I think, there's the circles where you are together to be in dialogue. So that is why you're together, which is very different than where you're together to create a shared consciousness and understanding and awareness about a certain topic. where you invite dialogue to have a different way to be with something that you care about. So I did it around climate change a lot, or agriculture, or and it's very hard for people to be with disturbance and to have almost a physical capacity to stay with it. And for the ones who are holding the circle to hold it. And so when you are in person, everything is part of it, and everything, like the container, can hold disturbance and everybody's people perception. So someone can run out and come back, and all of that is more difficult in an online space, especially if the principle, which I am not judging because I use it as well, but the principle is stay muted. So if you are in a dialogue space and you want all those things to come up, it's very hard to have that come into the center of the circle when there is this trained discipline to stay muted, and then come in when you cannot, when you can unmute, right? And so it has been in spaces where it was important that it came, that it showed up, because it was just a bottleneck for a other breath in the journey that it wasn't easy to create. And so more and more I'm come part of calls, not with huge groups like here, but where they say, please don't mute, and have the human voices, the sounds come in, the ahas and the breaths and the dogs and the kids, and to just bring the world a little bit more in when it is important in that space, that the world is present, that we have that conversation in the world and with the world we are part of. And I like that those new practices show up, that sometimes we notice this is important, let's take this as a principle, and sometimes no, it's going to be terribly annoying, but please let's have the chaos present. Yeah.
Just before you spoke, Julie, I was going to say something about how I experienced online dialogue being somewhat an impoverished experience of silence, but we had a relatively long silence before you spoke. And I think in response to what you just observed, when someone would interrupt in a face-to-face dialogue, it often proved to be a generative moment to discover what it was that allowed someone to jump in so quickly, rather than letting what had just been uttered, or what the gestalt of the entire group was, kind of settle in before responding. So I really appreciate the notion that I will not mute myself now. Of course, with 96 people on the call, it could be quite chaotic if everyone followed that rule.
I want to say something about
You're muted, Lee.
Lee, we can't hear you.
Yeah, just to remind everyone that later in the session, we'll come
Hey, I
to
don't understand. Wait a minute. I am unmuting myself, and the next thing I know is I'm muted again. So as
Yes.
I'm talking, I'm muted again. What is going on?
Yes, I'll explain what's happening. That later in the session, we'll come to a full and open comment session, question and answer, whatever is forthcoming. But for the time being, we're working with this original group of 7. So if you please don't mind waiting until we'll have a break a bit later, and then the entire remainder of the session will be given over to question and comment. And James, if you could make note of the people that have tried to join in, and we'll begin that segment with them. So to return and continue with our smaller group here. Yes, we're open to continue.
Sally, I'd like to invite you to say a little bit more about proper disturbance as opposed to a superficial disturbance, because you indicated that it's a disturbance that goes deeply, you know, perhaps beyond our, you know, verbal territory.
Well, and I'd like to invite you to join me in considering what a proper disturbance might be. If that's, if you're up for that, Dave. Yeah, well, I maybe garbled it a bit at the beginning, trying to slot myself into a little bit of time space, but you know, Bohm proposes to us suspension and so on, doesn't he? So that we don't suppress or express what arises for us. I mean, not don't, period, that's it. Otherwise we'd all just sit and look at each other, I guess. But I think the suspension is inviting us to look at where the superficial disturbance, or not where, but in what way it's arising and what from. And I don't know, I mean, it's often quite difficult in the group itself to sit with something. I find sometimes I can manage that better when I'm on my own. And sometimes it's difficult to know. It just is difficult to know in the ordinary sense of knowing when not expressing it is gives one a possibility of going deeper into the origins of that superficial disturbance. But I think, as I said at the beginning, it's something to do with the opportunity to, as I said, Rob mentioned in the very first session of this series, to begin to be aware in real time of how much, how limited, how gripped we are by thought, by the system we're in all the time, and how much we're reorganizing our prejudices and how much we're dwelling in that. And I think it's, I mean, it, you know, I found myself saying recently, I think in a space we were in together, David, that I wondered how close we could ever get to that disturbance. I mean, there's an attempt to go, what is this and what is this, and then lower down, and then childhood stuff, and then collective stuff, and then, you know, the history of humanity for the last 10,000 years or whatever. And I mean, that's all kind of intellectual. And then I might sometimes, I think in that conversation I had a flutter. I think I said it was like a flutter of suddenly feeling that despair that I might feel at one moment felt like it was always there, but it had shown itself out of being triggered, but it had always been there, and that's maybe true of all of those qualities we could name. And maybe, you know, you followed despair back to when one has a kind of collective feeling like that, back to a sense that we all feel it, and out of that compassion can grow. Those kinds of things. But I always feel I'm in that position that Rob talked about, where I'm speaking about it and very rarely, except the odd flutter, really speaking from it. So, and I think to begin to find that way into speaking from it is disturbing, properly disturbing.
Well, listening to you and, you know, attending in the present, which I'd say for me, dialogue, it's what it's about, and asking myself the question about proper disturbance. Yes, I could feel flutterings, and the flutterings I feel into are intimations of, amongst other things, fear that lies behind the ego. I mean, I wouldn't have a self, you know, if it didn't need protection. If it feels it needs protection at some level from what someone might say or think of me or whatever, then there's fear. And so here I could say is an example of touching on proper disturbance, touching into intimations of what may lie behind, you know, the cultured smoothness of the self. It's ways of operating, you know, it's ways of doing things without showing its vulnerabilities and senses of inadequacy or whatever. So now, right at this moment, I just want to say, you know, in terms of dialogue, I find that words now are carrying me more than the original feeling, than the original intimation. And I think this is a really important part of dialogue, you see, because here I'm not properly disturbed. You know, I'm riding my usual horse. And I think that's important too, you know, to ask why all of this, the why for all of this, what is the movement, the whole movement behind it, which may not be personal at all, which may be something that belongs to all of us. So I'm wondering if we are not always, pretty well, almost always properly disturbed, but we don't notice it in any situation where the self is present. So I'll leave it at that. But thank you for opening it out, Sally. I want to be a rebel like Richard and leave my microphone on.
I wonder if the silence that Julie spoke of in her telling about the Aboriginals, I wonder if that isn't just such an important way of following in what David, you and Sally were speaking of, the moment of conversion of that inner fluttering when it goes to words, or particularly when it goes too quick into words. That's when we lose the connection with it, it seems to me. So it seems like the the awareness of the importance of that silence, not being vacant, but being so necessary for the capacity for that flutter to take some roots, be able to grow a bit.
You know, when I was speaking before and there was a very long silence, which I was a bit uncomfortable with, but that dissolved and it began to feel very safe. And I nearly said that, but I'd run out of words. I couldn't say anything else. But there was a feeling of immense safety amongst us all and amongst whatever it is we're saying. I think I'm probably always reflecting a little bit on, I mean, unconsciously on childhood things when it wasn't safe to speak, it seemed, at school and at home. And it's growing up, making friends, it becomes safe to speak and have fun together. But over the years, it's been okay to talk about some things, but not other things. And if one's talking about, you know, one's understanding or consciousness or lack of it, well, there isn't always a space to be able to talk about that. And have other people probably know what you mean or have thoughts about it themselves. Anyhow, I just wanted to say that it was a very interesting and refreshing, long feeling of safety. And it may be this group, but it may possibly be much more. It's safe and really, probably really necessary. But we do provide a safety for each other.
I'd like to refer back to what you were saying, Anna, about the silence. And we've had a few of those today. And gosh, there's so much in that question of silence for us as individuals. And I remember years and years and years ago, decades ago, I read an article by a gentleman named Ivan Illich. Many of you may know Ivan's work. I think he's passed away, I'm not sure. But the title of the essay was Silence is a Commons. And he meant that we should have the right culturally to have silence as well as personally. And that seems to be going away, that cultural possibility of silence. So I'd like to share a story, and which will move us into the second part of our dialogue here. Gosh, it was nearly 30 years ago, and David Bohm had passed away, and his wife, Sarah, came here to Albuquerque to visit. And we did a long road trip together through the Western US and even up into Canada, and doing dialogues along the way. And she was adamant that we go to Las Vegas as part of that trip, and so she could play the slot machines, which she did with relish. But the very last stop on that trip was all the way back to the East Coast at is it Amherst College or Amherst University? one or the other, in Massachusetts. And we had a dialogue scheduled there. There were 25 people or so in that dialogue. And remember, this is 1994 or 1994, I think. And as we gathered in the circle in this room in the university, there was this young man that came in. He was part of the circle, part of those who were invited. And he had a laptop computer in his lap, which, laptops were relatively new at that point. So it was rather conspicuous. And just as we were beginning, he made a point of saying, "Excuse me, I'll be right back." And he took that computer, the laptop, and he went over to a corner of the room and he plugged it in. And he got down on his hands and knees and was manipulating the computer. And of course, everybody's watching him and we're waiting for him. And when he came back to the circle, he said, "Oh, I was checking my email." And of course, email was also very new at that point. And he said, "I'll be doing that from time to time." So all of this, was rather unusual, but we proceeded. And lo and behold, about every 15 or 20 minutes, he would get up and leave the circle and go and get down on his hands and knees to this laptop and check his email. And then he would come back to the circle. And I thought, is this where we're headed? Because I didn't have a computer at that point. I didn't really even know what email was. I'm often behind on these things. But I thought, is this where we're headed? And, today I am that guy. I'm always checking my email. And, it's just the tip of the iceberg, the checking email. It's much bigger than that. But I have become what I feared when we had the dialogue that day. So it leads us to this question, which in some ways is rooted in our original question about in the flesh living of life and digital living of life, and what that interface is and what those various possibilities are. But the question I think that's worthy of our attention is, as we become more and more immersed in digital platforms, and that is what's happening. Whatever we may think, for good or ill, that is what's happening, and it will increase. How much can we be aware of how that works, that immersion? What capacity do we have as human beings to be aware of that deeper and deeper immersion, both as individuals and then also collectively? And the word that keeps coming up for me around this question is discernment. Discernment, awareness. What capacities do we have to stay alert to how this is working, if we even have the inclination? You see, if we don't have the inclination to stay alert, because as I said, it's not just email. We have full-blown artificial intelligence. We have bioengineering. All these things are in the queue waiting to layer into our life experience and our consciousness. So do we even have an inclination to pay attention to this? And if we do, then what resources do we have to be able to exercise discernment about how we want to relate to these ever deepening platforms? So I would like, once again, before we come to a break and open up to the larger group, I would like for anyone in our group of 7 here to share any thoughts about those kinds of questions.
Your question, Lee, takes me back to apparently a conversation you and David Bohm had that you wrote up in an article one time. And David Bohm said that for dialogue, the individuals need to be doing their own work outside, their own self-work. Now, I'm not using quite the right terminology, I know, but the implication that we need to do our own personal growth and development in order to be able to participate well. And to me, that links with Sally's phrase of proper disturbance. I think it's very disturbing what's going on in the world in general right now. And what I feel at times is when I pay attention to Facebook and I pay attention to the news and I watch all these various things, what I'm trying to do is dissociate from the proper disturbance I ought to be feeling in the moment because of what's going on in the world in general. So it's giving me this opportunity that all the online thing, all the artificial intelligence, they're fantasy things that take me out of my sense of disturbance. Now, this is maybe not proper disturbance, but improper disturbance that I'm feeling at the moment. But I guess when you say discernment, it makes me feel a much bigger sense of responsibility for how I participate in little ways. Instead of picking up my cell phone and watching Facebook for a while to separate myself out, is there some other alternative I could be taking to help me deal with what's really going on inside? So it just seems to me that the globe as a whole is dissociating more and more, getting more and more into the fantasy because we're not able to and somehow deal personally and collectively with all the disturbance that's going on. So the discernment, I think, is a sense of responsibility that I feel maybe I need to take more deeply in order to have a better response, at least within myself.
Yeah, I liked what you said, Lee, about stay awake. For me, some of this goes faster than ever, right? So big changes like that or big innovations like that used to take one generation, and now we have like 5 a year or what. And I think the discernment is between, what is inevitable and what is unacceptable. Like every time something entirely new, often those things make something new possible that wasn't possible before. And then there is a movement of resistance, and then there is a movement of overuse and abuse, and then there is this finding of balance in how it's beneficial or how it meets boundaries. I'm now putting it very black and white, but I mean, but it goes so fast and it's so diverse in the angles where it comes from, that staying awake collectively and almost this capacity to constantly make sense. What is it? What does it make possible? What is it? What's the danger? Like you don't have years anymore to realize. It's almost like one after the other, and knowing that part of it is inevitable and part of it is making things possible. And then, where are those boundaries necessary? Because human beings love overusing some of those things. So, but it's a good question. Just hearing your question, it just literally takes my breath for a second, the way you worded it. Yeah. So I think it's like a collectively staying very awake with that discernment, collectively.
But then, since our problem is that we're largely asleep, are we suddenly going to wake up? I mean, you know, we call it information technology, don't we? And I remember once reading a description, somebody imagining how if you wanted to describe just a minute of what was happening in the world from the point of view of every cell and every atom, and you'd be here for eternity trying to do it. So, you know, there's, so that's just to sort of talk about the endlessness of information in a way, whether it's information on Facebook or from James Webb Telescope or from each other, and so much of it now is fake in some way as well, and how we discern that. And so, I mean, and then I want to ask, what would our discernment be based on? Would it be based on the same premises by which we make all this stuff? You know, I mean, good, bad, and indifferent. I'm not, you know, but, and I'm just sort of wondering where that ability to keep boundaries that you talked about, Julie, or to discern, you know, without wanting to make it problematic. I just want to ask the question, in what way do we imagine we have that capability, which isn't to say we don't.
For me, the challenge of staying awake, and it's about choosing what we look at and how we look. All of technology built by human beings is loaded with bias and prejudice that is hidden in the structure of technology itself. And it's very difficult to discern that. But it's only in the last maybe 10 years that people have questioned what Facebook is, which is really harnessing our choices to sell to the engines of commerce. It's not about connecting us. That's not what it's about. And yet it got launched and grew without any attention to the idea that they were discovering more about us than we knew about ourselves by assembling all of our choices. And then the system was discerning from that who might be interested in knowing that I was looking at hearing aids. And so now hearing aids appear in Instagram, Facebook, everywhere in my digital experience. I didn't sign up for that, but here it is. And that's just the surface. It's much deeper than that. And how to be discerning of the way technology is, in some respect, abusing us, our most human qualities, is really challenging. And then in contrast, Zoom has allowed us to use a lot less gasoline, which is in service of responding to climate change, which several of us have noticed. It's a little paradoxical.
Well, to me, one of the key things is to keep asking the question. If we stop asking the questions, that puts us in a very different place, kind of slippery slope. But if we can keep asking, what does it mean to discern? What does it mean to try to understand? And can we even do that in the current circumstances? You know, if you just take the most obvious manifestation of this now, the incredible profusion of lies and misinformation through every kind of media that exists, and how to sort through that. Can we discern? Can we understand? Can we be aware? Can we be awake? How, if we can do it, how do we do that? And especially with young people coming up in this, can they develop capacities to be awake to how this is working? And if we can't and they can't, where are we headed? But if we can, and if they can, then where are we headed? How do we do it? What's involved? How difficult is it? What can we do to keep that kind of question afloat? And I think as long as we're asking the questions, we have possibilities. But if we just capitulate to this increasing absence of silence at the cultural level, then it doesn't look very good to me. So the questions seem, excuse me, the questions seem really, really valuable. Right.
I wonder what it is that's doing the discerning, you know, coming back to what Sally was bringing up. You know, ordinarily, I would say that when I talk about discernment, I mean setting something into my framework of thinking, weighing, measuring, judging, coming to a conclusion from which I feel I can act. So is that what we mean by discernment? You know, the mind has its ways and the heart has ways of its own. Is that a way of discernment? There's the question then, when there's silence, can silence discern? Can silence open a whole new field of discernment, which isn't mine, which has a life of its own? And in dialogue, you see, there's this whole question of discernment too. Okay, you know, I feel like riding my verbal horse sometime. So I'm asking, you know, is it possible to speak from silence, in a sense, that silence generates the words? So I'm just saying all these things back to the question of discernment, you know, because I think discernment is really all about the discerner. You know, according to the discerner, discernment will work. You know, you ask the Pope to discern something about religion, and you know, you get a Catholic answer. So, and I guess, you know, each of us is our own Pope. I just say one more thing in a different direction, which is like my interaction and relationship with the technological environment. I may not be separate. That's a different view. That I am my environment, just like I'm my foot. You know, I'm the air that I breathe, in a way. So there may be a different way. You see, am I immersed in this culture, or am I this culture? You know? When I drive down in my car, asphalt pavement, you know, am I in some sense that? And when I walk through a forest and see the wind in the leaves and smell the air. So I just want to open this aspect of the question too, you know, the holistic aspect.
Yeah, that reminds me of that. Doesn't David Bohm use that image of the acorn doesn't grow into a big acorn, it grows into an oak tree, and the oak tree is an expression of the whole environment. you know, it's of the DNA of the acorn, of the soil, of the air, of the water. It's an expression of all that. So it gives a little bit of a sense of that I am that. So, you know, when I don't, there might be somebody here in the larger group who knows better than me, but I've certainly read plenty of stuff about how the internet grew or ballooned hugely on the basis of the demand for pornography and the production of pornography. And so that's us, isn't it? I mean, it's not, none of this is kind of apart from us and what we are. I mean, so yeah, we really have to look inward as much as outward, if that's the right way of putting it.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you everyone in our group of 7 today. I think holding all of these questions that everyone has brought out is what's most helpful. And if we could have mostly live engagement from people and maybe sprinkled a bit here and there with comments or questions from the chat.
Of course. So just if you would like to make a contribution or ask a question, if you can please use the raise your hand function, which can be found at the bottom of your screen under reactions, that would be great. And I'll call out your name. There were a few people that wanted to contribute earlier. Is Sue still here?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. David Bohm's been a part of my life since 1991, when I found On Dialogue in the bookstore at the Center for Creative Leadership, where I've been a coach. I can't believe I actually discovered all of you guys after all this time, but it's wonderful. Yeah, my heart is soaring like a hawk. So thank you for to this day. I want to tell you a good news story. So after many years of thinking dialogue was really kind of out of reach and just using it in coaching, I was able to kind of inadvertently cobble together a group of 7 people who've been meeting online only, doing dialogue on Zoom since last year. We met at the Leadership Forum community, which is a global network of, you know, internationally interested people in leadership, and many people were interested in Bohm and in dialogue. And so this represents 4 continents, 3 countries, and age ranges of 27 to 79. We use a lot of principles that you guys have been talking about, mainly what I've gathered through the years from coaches who had almost put together Bohm workshops back in the 90s that I attended. So I had some materials I could work with, but expressing the most significant emphasis on silences has been what has helped us. We've been meeting weekly for almost a year. And then we were able to do dialogue workshops for 2 other labs. In the Leadership Forum, we're a lab that spin out of each annual summit. So we've actually presented at this last year's summit on dialogue and its unfoldment into education. It had a great response. We have mainly found that everything that you've talked about today, especially suspending things, we mainly give the 4 guidelines of no assumptions, no agenda, no judgment, and suspending thoughts. But our dialogue subtitle is creating common meaning. So we look for the thread of meaning running through everything that's been shared. We spend a lot of time focused on silence. Most of our dialogue topics are questions like, what is it mean to be human? Or how do we think of thought? What is thought? What is possibility? We've looked at so many things in our own small group, but now that we've been engaged with larger groups, not so large, but more people, we were looking to share what we've been exploring. And it's so encouraging to hear those of you who actually knew David Bohm, hear the subtleties of things he said. But for the most part, I'm just trying to encourage you to know that it's been very successful on Zoom. It's the only way we've done dialogue. I've been in a real live dialogue group back in the late 80s, early 90s at the Center for Creative Leadership. It's what got me really interested in David Bohm. And then I never had a chance to be in another in live dialogue workshop for years, decades, 3 decades. So just saying, I don't want to take up too much time. Contact me. I would love to be able to collaborate with anyone in this room about the viability of dialogue on Zoom. And we are looking to network globally with anyone who is interested. And I'm very interested in learning from you all. I've learned a lot today. And I just want to thank you again so very, very much. It's discernment is a good word. And I love the idea of being disturbed, but in a way, it's more like letting ourselves be impacted, and really holding that thought, all those thoughts in suspension without jumping to conclusions and listening for the whole meaning that's in the room. That's been our biggest focus in our practice. We're still very new, but we have come to love each other as people in a way that I could not have imagined. We have someone in Australia, Turkey, Poland, and the US.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sue, for
Yes.
sharing the success story. That is indeed very good news. We'd like to try to get as many people in as possible, but thank you for sharing the story. James, do we have someone else?
We do, yes. We had, I believe Valjean wanted to come in earlier as well.
Yes, Valjean.
I think that was Valtraub, not Valjean.
Yeah, I came into this meeting very late, so no, I didn't have my hand up. Just enjoyed what I've heard, but I'm going to have to wait for the recording because I missed a great deal of this. Thank you.
No problem. We'll then go to Todd.
Just a quick observation, the wonderful term that still sticks and it will for a good time of proper disturbance. It reminded me quite immediately of 2 other terms put together that seemingly have a polarity and a tension, but then they point to a new direction. And we had a recently deceased civil rights leader in the States, John Lewis, who had the term of good trouble, to get into good trouble, which was a catalyst, for civil disobedience. And proper disturbance is sort of a mental catalyst too, to point in a whole different tangent that can start a conversation or a change, whether that's, personal, mental, or a dialogue between many. But those 2 terms, again, they felt together when I first heard proper disturbance. So just a bit of history from the States to add to that. Thank you.
Good trouble. Thank you, Todd. James?
Thank you, Todd. We'll next go to Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I have a couple of comments, a bit divergent comments, maybe based on our experience on human interaction in big groups, let's say more than 50 people. Usually, traditional dialogue relies a lot on words. And in fact, we are very interested also in even in abstract realms of human culture, in gesturing or even drawing, not just talking. And what we have seen is that Zoom enables us to launch complex dynamics where people do not just talk, but we may have a shared whiteboard where everybody can scribble, and we can chat at the same time. And also, more important, maybe we can toggle in a split second between random breakout rooms and plenary setting. Those breakout rooms in small groups may become havens for people, for human interaction. And so this toggling eventually launches a complex dynamics, which I think is very interesting. And of course, it's not, it's hard to manage but I would say it's not chaotic, but complex. All this without forgetting the importance of silence. I agree. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. James, is there anyone that may have a question for anyone in our smaller group about the issues that we've raised today?
Let's see if Kathleen has something for us. You're just muted at the moment.
Muted.
Thanks, James, and thanks everyone for this conversation. It's been great. I'm going to try and I've made some notes, so I'm going to try and articulate this as best I can. First of all, let me say that I also, like Sue and the last gentleman who spoke, I also run groups online where we integrate both breakouts and conversations, and we do something called an update in which the person speaking cannot be interrupted, and the listening in the silence has been extremely powerful for people's learnings as they do that exchange. So I'll just say that. And with respect to proper disturbing, one of the ways that I hear it is the interruption of an always way of being, which we use all the time in the work we do. But what I wanted to point to is this conversation about discernment and how I think David, you spoke about, how do we stay present to what we're looking at, and how do we discern all this information? So for me, I think about the distinction of journeying through an intentional inquiry that discerns or emerges an exploration that is perhaps unique to the individual and yet accomplished in the group. And it's not necessarily intellectually explained, and yet it's generated from an internal experience to external language that gives us access to a lens through which we then begin to notice what is coming at us. So to your point, Sally, in this context, the relationship to the continuum of information, if we're in a practice of inquiry exploration, does our discernment, and I have my own experience of this, but I'll ask you, would you imagine that our discernment in an inquiry and its emergent exploration, not answers, but rather living the exploration, would serve to guide us in what we receive and take in, and thereby narrow the scope of what we're seeing that's relevant to the exploration that we're in? Any one of you can.
Well, I was trying to keep up with you there, Kathleen. There was such a lot in what you said. And I've started to speak now, and I'm not sure whether I can really respond adequately to all of that. So have I got this right, that you're saying something about what happens in the group process that's not really obvious or visible, but I mean, presumably you're suggesting it's from each of the contributions coming together in a way, considering whatever has arisen. And
sorry.
No, go.
I think that's the learning that occurs in the update. But if we, like in my work, and this may be different than what Sue was talking about, we actually have an inquiry that each individual looks at through the same, the questions are common, but the response and the experience and the language and the resonance is unique to each and every individual. It's not easy to explain in a 5-minute conversation. And then that group being in that exploration out into the world in their individual way comes back and has an exchange in the group about what they've noticed and what they've seen and how it's impacted them in their lives. And so, and in that time that they're doing that update, if you will, there is a listening in the space, because it's set up that way, where no one else speaks until that person is complete. And hence there is a learning that way. And my question to you, and maybe it's too layered, it was, if we do that, if we're disciplined in our inquiry about what we're looking at. And each individual finds their way to an exploration inside a common inquiry. Then we are individually and collectively in an exploration. And thereby, does that serve to guide all that information that's coming in at us? Does that help?
Yeah, I think it's enormous, and we could spend the next 2 hours unfolding that, I think. But yeah, I guess that's become quite clear to me in the various different dialogue settings I've been in, that we're all doing it slightly differently, but in a way those differences they're just inevitably going to be the case, maybe because we've all had, you know, idiosyncratic variations on a theme of life. And so I don't think that matters as long as we're kind of keeping our antennae out for, you know, I might use a word this way. I notice a lot of people use the word consciousness in the way I use the word awareness. So I just have to remember that for me, consciousness has a particular meaning and awareness another, you know, even if that's only at the level of concept and intellect. But I mean, it helps to have a similar language, I guess, but I think inwardly we're all doing it partly with language, partly with memory, partly with attention and listening, if we can, if our intention is that. So yes, I don't know whether this is really an adequate response, but I think we're all an aspect of the whole thing, aren't we? So I mean, as I think Lee said early on, the listening is key to it, and when it's the kind of listening where one abandons oneself for a moment to listen to the other.
Yes,
maybe.
yes, well said. Yes, and doesn't really abandon oneself, but sets oneself aside so that the space between can be heard. Yes.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Sally. James, do we have maybe time for a couple of more comments?
Yes. Well, there's actually a question from the chat that might be interesting, which is, why does the movement away from disturbance feel safe? What experiences a perceived sense of safety?
Could you read it once more, James?
Of course. Why does the movement away from disturbance feel safe? What experiences a perceived sense of safety?
Would someone like to take that on, please, in our group of 7 here?
One thing that comes to mind is one of my colleagues always says that for dialogue and for change and transformation, whether it's individually or collectively, often it requires a perceived sense of safety in order to step into it. But then the moment that perceived sense of safety, I don't like the word very much. I mean, it doesn't cover what I really mean, but it's like, then when the moment those two can coexist in one moment, a lot of change and transformation is possible. So for me, it's not a movement away. I think there is like a reflex to avoid discomfort or disturbance, unless we feel in a certain spot quite grounded where we can coexist with it, and then change is possible.
Thank you.
So Julie, you were saying the two exist together. Did you mean the disturbance and the groundedness, the disturbance and the safety together?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Well, then we'll go next to Annette.
Thank you so much, group of 7 and everyone who's watching. So my curiosity is, and I'm sort of torn between whether I share a comment or I go with Lee's, do you have a question for the group? They're a little bit intertwined. I found myself deeply relaxing and being more participative and reflective when a number of you unmuted. And so my curiosity is, what was that experience like for you between the front end and the latter half when more had unmuted? And I can say more of how it affected me, but I sort of wanted to ask that question to you, of each of you, and maybe open it back for you to be talking with each other about what that experience was like.
That's very good. Thank you, Annette.
Well, for me, it made me feel more like we were in the same room when 5 of us were unmuted.
Yeah, you feel included. You're more in circle than it feels. Otherwise, you step in front and then you step back,
Right.
but you stay. Yeah.
I felt like when the unmuting occurred that a new possibility opened, that there could be much more movement. And even if it didn't overtly occur, at least for me, the feeling was there that it could.
Well, it's interesting to think that we have a verbal cue to tell us that people are unmuted. I mean, it takes perception, and I think I have over 40 people on my screen. It's hard to know when it's such a large group. It was easy with just 7.
It feels more resonant when one's unmuted. It's a fuller feeling in some, I think, not just imaginary way. But I have dogs that bark, so I'm going to mute again.
No.
We love the dog.
Yeah, let's hear the dog. That's great.
Well, they heard you. They've gone quiet for a bit.
Any further thoughts on Annette's comment?
Doesn't really make any difference to me. I think I was feeling with muted the more attentiveness to people's sense of completion, or my guess that they were completed. So it felt respectful to me to leave the mute on. But when you ask the question, Annette, it makes me think of a lot of dialogues that I've been in where my own irritation comes up significantly when people talk on top of each other and disrespectfully. I have to say there's a part of me that recognizes that calls up my assumption of how we ought to be behaving. And I notice people who are dominant and speak too much, and it seems like having the mute buttons on in a larger group tends to help us discipline when some people don't seem to have it. So it just brought up all sorts of irritations that I feel that are in some ways littleness on my behalf, and on some ways wanting to feel the group as a whole to be able to participate well.
Thank you, Beth.
Yes.
Yes.
The unmuting in this situation, I felt brought me closer to an edge. It's like the muted machine is like a buffer between not receiving, of course, but from the arising of an impulse to whether that impulse will find expression. And if it does, finding the creative form in which it will. So I found in this case, anyhow, that unmuting, it brought me somehow closer to an edge. The edge, I think, that has to do with both disturbance and silence. So proper disturbance.
Thank you, David. I think we'll give you that last word of being at the edge. And we've now come to the edge of our session today. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart all of the 7 people in our smaller group today for taking the time to really work with our questions and our quality of interaction and dialogue today. And I want to thank everyone that tuned in and joined us, and would encourage you, if you have the chance, to join us tomorrow for the Indigenous Day. And once again, thank you, James and Eleanor, everyone at PARI. And I'll turn it back to you, James.
Well, thank you so much, Lee, for organizing this panel and for moderating. Thank you all to all the panelists, Anna, Beth, Richard, Julie, Dave and Sally. Thank you all so much. This session's really been, I think that sacred space that you were talking about, Sally, I think was created during the past 2 hours. So thank you of that. And of course, thank you all for everyone for joining us. Thank you for those who contributed through your questions or through the chat or just by being there and listening and being present with us. Before we go, I would like to echo what Lee just invited you all to, which is tomorrow's very special session, which will be the Indigenous Dialogue, which will have the theme of Walk in Beauty. During the session, we will be joined by Leroy Littlebear, Jeanette Armstrong, Greg Cajete, Amethyst First Rider, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Melissa Nelson, John Briggs, Harvey Locke, and Lee Nichol again. So really hope you do make it to that one. It will be the last session for this part of Beyond Bohm. So yeah, just want to invite you to that. In the meantime, though, if you do have any questions or want to contact us, you can use our website or email us directly at eleanor@paricenter.com to contact Eleanor. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you to all the 7 panelists, and we'll see you again soon here at the PARI Center.